Welcome and good evening. On behalf of the Whitman Freedom Team, I want to welcome all of you here for our discussion about having civility and respectability in discussing tough and difficult conversations, particularly the political climate that we find ourselves in today. Before I go any further, though, I have to make a couple of announcements. State Senator Allison Sullivan Almeida was scheduled to be here but had a conflict. And she said if she's done with her other commitment, she would come in at the end. And if she does come in at the end, I would allow her to say some words and address the people here. So that would be good. Second, the Reverend Michelle Louise Mathieu, who is the rector of the All Saints Episcopal Church in Whitman, was going to be one of our other speakers. She dealt with the homeless in Rhode Island, and she's done a tremendous amount of work statewide for food pantries in that state. She came down with the COVID, so her substitute is my friend, Dr. Michael Krasanik. So Mike filled in that spot. So I apologize for advertising that some people were here, but it went out before the notices came in. The other thing I'd like to address very, very briefly. This past weekend, there were some rumors that were floating around the town, mostly on social media. I'm not on that particular social media web, but I did see pictures of photos of drawings that looked like symbols of a swastika and so forth. I've been in conversation with the Chief of Police, Tim Hanlon, and I'm taking his advice and basically saying that the police will handle this. They're well aware of it. But he would say that there are so many rumors out there. People are getting all upset. One of the rumors was that Governor Healy was going to use the Whitman Armory to house immigrant families. It's not true. So these are the kinds of things that are out there that are making it difficult for people to, one, to stay settled down and calm, and also it causes a lot of dysfunction and a lot of arguments among friends, quite frankly. So I just want to point that out. I do have a couple of remarks before we do begin. And first is to welcome you all here. I see a lot of folks who I knew I could count on, which is really nice to see. We have all our guests here, and as we go through, I will introduce each one of them. Tonight's program is brought to you by the nonprofit organization, the Whitman Freedom Team. Our mission is to preserve freedom through unity in the community. The Whitman Freedom Team explores ways of offering dialogue and support to individuals and the entire community with the goal of not only promoting love, inclusion, and trust, but moving beyond tolerance to embracing, celebrating, and sharing our community's diversity. The motto, "Find a Way," which came from a young man who passed away last year, drives me and drives us. Find a way. Tonight's theme is civility and respect. Our program features individuals who have committed their lives to promoting those goals. They bring the message of how we can set a tone of civility and respect to discussions, and how disagreements should not be a recipe for destruction of our human connection. Before we begin, I'd like to share with you a few quotes regarding communication, because that's what it's about. I think it's a good place where we can start. One quote, it's anonymous, but one quote is, "The word communication comes from the Latin communico, meaning share." That means share ideas, share opinions, and do that civilly. And the next one comes from Cicero. "It appears that genuine friendship cannot exist where one of the parties is unwilling to hear the truth and the other is equally indisposed to speak it." I think that says a lot about our tone and what we're seeing today. Today we find families, friends, and colleagues who are unable to speak with one another about certain topics. The number of people who feel that voicing their opinion will result in the loss of friendships is alarming. It's not only with friendships, it's within families, and the atmosphere we find ourselves is very concerning. Tonight, our speakers will share their views on why and how we, as we move forward, need to be more civil and respectful when discussing the many difficult issues facing us in the future. It's my pleasure right now to have our first speaker. I'm going to introduce him before he comes up here, Dr. Karl Kowalski. Dr. Kowalski is a longtime Whitman resident who has dedicated his life to education and public service. He has served on many committees and boards: the Whitman Freedom Team Board of Directors, the Whitman Freedom Team's corporate offices, the Whitman School Committee, the Whitman-Hanson School Committee, former senior vice president of Massasoit Community College, board member of Whitman Counseling, Brockton Chapter, and he was a member of the Brockton Rotary of International. I could list a lot more, but we'd be here all night. So it's my pleasure to introduce Karl Kowalski. Karl?
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to read to you. I don't trust myself to give an ad lib talk these days. I don't want to have a Mitch McConnell or a Joe Biden moment, because those moments happen when you can't find words, and I don't trust myself totally. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to read something to you. It was kind of interesting that Tom started off talking about Cicero and the Greeks, because I'll be quoting some Greeks in here too. Historians tell us that past is prologue, that one way of getting at what is might be to review what has been. In the 19th century, Matthew Arnold, a Victorian poet and inspector of schools, caught a glimpse of the real that can be appreciated today as well. In his poem Dover Beach, which was written in 1867, Arnold describes a world that has lost the gift of faith, a world that has lost the security of a coherent world vision, and the results are devastating. But let him tell it. The scene of the poem is a room overlooking the English Channel, a room from which the narrator may see the lights of France and hear the waves that break upon the English shore. He has left the side of his companion to look out the window, and his pleasure at her company is interrupted by some very depressing thoughts. The sound of the waves being drawn back across the pebbles reminds him of the inevitability of human sadness, and that a life without vision will be brutal, nasty, and short. The final stanza is often quoted and urges us to seek unity in a struggle against the darkness. Quoted fairly recently, well, within the last 40 years, I guess, by Norman Mailer in the title of his book, Armies of the Night. But here's the last stanza. Ah, love, let us be true to one another. For the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. We might be tempted to make fun of Arnold, the stodgy inspector of schools, who let the sound of the tide ruin his evening, but one thing does ring true. We too are here as on a darkling plain, described in sometimes true but often false reporting on social media. Tom was referring to that. And the only way to shed light is to join with and be true to one another. If Arnold's world were a battlefield so covered with fog that he couldn't tell his allies from his enemies, how fog-covered is our world? How can we find happiness in a world filled with hate, fake news, and division? Well, when asked to define human happiness, Aristotle replied that joy was tied to the, quote, function of a human being, unquote. Assuming that there's a purpose to life, Aristotle stated that we realize that purpose by performing the tasks of being human to our greatest capability. If it's in our nature to think, we can only be happy if we think logically. If it's in our nature to feel, we can only be happy if we feel deeply. Happiness and excellence are forever intertwined. To be happy, we must act according to our nature. And furthermore, we must act well. First step towards excellence and happiness is to know oneself. And there are any number of people we might ask to serve as a guide. Margaret Danner began her search for self-knowledge in Chicago, for example, and by the 1940s had been recognized in that town as a poet of some excellence. Her poetry reveals an energetic search to define those qualities that separate the human from other forms of life. And in her poem, Through the Varied Patterned Lace, she renders with joy the following belief. As I look into each different face, I am exalted. I am exalted to recognize His grace shimmering through the varied patterned lace. There is this good in every man, whether French or Russian, Italian or American, and glowing so in you, O Igbo, Yoruba, Zulu, Congolese, Fan. I look at you and feel it flooding me. Divinity must win the race. It will not be halted. We are all small sons of one clan. I am exalted. Margaret Denner knew that respect for those different from us, that is, social unity, is the key to true happiness. Unfortunately, the human condition is not forever felicitous. And in another of her poems shows that Margaret Danner is not blindly optimistic in her quest for mutual respect. Sometimes to know oneself and join with others, it helps to make comparisons to the animal or mineral kingdoms. In, quote, "This is an African worm," unquote, she states that worms, by their nature, bide their time before taking flight. Her poem, "This is an African worm, but then a worm in any land is still a worm. It will not stride, run, stand up before the butterflies who have passed their worm-like state. It must keep low, not lift its head. I've had the dread experience, I know. A worm can do nothing but crawl. Crawl and wait." Despite recognizing its dreadfulness, Danner has poetically delivered what many believe is a way to human happiness, to know one's place and to wait for things to change. This is not an uncommon reaction for one who's oppressed, particularly by an autocratic or a caste-like society. And we find another example in the poems of Zbigniew Herbert, a contemporary Polish poet. Herbert was not allowed to publish his personal poetry until 1954. The Polish government didn't allow it at that time. Herbert mistrusts human beings, therefore, and writes of the perfect creature, the stone, a creature wary of its limits, but every bit as vigilant as the African worm. But let him tell it. The stone is a perfect creature, equal to itself, mindful of its limits, filled exactly with a stony meaning, with a scent which does not remind one of anything, does not frighten anything away, does not arouse desire. Its ardor and coldness are just and full of dignity. I feel a heavy remorse when I hold it in my hand, and its noble body is permeated by false warmth. Stones cannot be tamed. To the end, they will look at us with a calm, very clear eye. Who we are, what we must do to be our best, to find happiness and societal unity, demands heroism, not acquiescence. It's not enough to wait for change, to watch with serenity. Heroism defies self-satisfaction and calls its members to struggle. Perhaps most of all, heroism demands vision, the kind of vision enjoyed by Harriet Tubman or by Martin Luther King, Jr., the vision that each of us deserves to be free. Heroism also carries with it the painful struggle to make our visions real, a struggle often leading to anxiety and loneliness, a struggle echoed by the plea of Joan of Arc at the end of Shaw's play. Burned at the stake for daring to challenge the political and religious leaders of her day, or perhaps merely for being a woman who happened to be right, Joan clearly offers the prayer of all who struggle. O God, who made us this beautiful earth, when will it be ready to receive thy saints? How long, O Lord? How long? The road to self-knowledge may indeed involve sacrifice and pain. For the world is rarely ready to applaud the vision or to join the fight, but the rewards may be many as well. At the end of that sacrifice, whether it be Jones challenging 15th century France or Eldridge Cleaver's challenging his chains, will always be wisdom, a new understanding of who we are and what we must do to be our best. The conclusion of that understanding may be varied. We might conclude with Virginia Woolf that a woman needs a room of her own to be a successful writer. We might conclude with James Baldwin that whoever debases others is debasing himself. We might conclude with Lerone Bennett that we must take the profit out of bigotry. Or we might conclude with Eldridge Cleaver that, quote, the price of hating others is loving oneself less. The specific understanding we require may not be important. What is important, however, is the struggle itself. The heroic struggle against ignorance is the way to excellence and happiness, no matter how much suffering that flight to wisdom entails. As the Greek tragedians taught us, man must suffer to be wise. As Aristotle reminds us, happiness cannot be achieved in less than a lifetime. One swallow does not make a summer, neither does one fine day. And one day or any brief period of felicity does not make a man entirely and perfectly happy. If we consciously fight each day to attain that end, no matter how much pain that fight brings, real freedom will follow, and the true unity of mutual respect will be ours. The worm will become the butterfly, and the stones themselves will start to sing. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. That was excellent. Really excellent. Thank you. Our next speaker is State Senator Michael Brady of Brockton, Mass. And Mike represents the Massachusetts 2nd Plymouth County, which includes Brockton, Avon, East Bridgewater, Halifax, Hanson, Whitman, part of Norfolk County, and precincts in Randolph, precincts 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. So it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Brady, Senator.
Thank you. And I want to say Dr. Carl Kowalski, who's a good friend, did a fantastic job. It's a tough act to follow, but I met Carl many years ago. We were in a play in Brockton. It was to raise money for our library, and our library was built with a Carnegie grant from Andrew Carnegie at the turn of the 1900s. And it was a beautiful building, historic but never handicap accessible. So one of my predecessors, Tom Kennedy, who was in a wheelchair, couldn't get in the building unless you carried him upstairs, never mind a young child. So we used to do these plays called Murder in the Library, and Dr. Kowalski and myself were the two suspects. And it was a computer virus that caused the disease. So we sang a song that was to the tune of Making Whoopee, but the theme was computer virus. And it's like, I'll use my modem against your thing friendly and all that. I don't remember all the lyrics, but it brings back some funny memories. And I've known Carl and his family for quite some time. I also worked at Massachusetts Community College a few years back with a grant that helped women and minorities. It was a federal and state funded grant, and we had higher placements. There was a few other community colleges, Quinsigamond and Worcester, Springfield, one in Boston, one down the Cape, and it helped people get jobs in the construction field. And it was very successful. We were under budget, but like everything else, there was some cuts made, and it ended, and then I got in the lottery. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Brockton. And how I got into politics, things, like life, we can't live in our past laurels. Things would change in Brockton. There was some tough financial times. The city was cut down to 3 cruises on a weekend night. And my mother was born, she lived in Rockland, but she met my father from Brockton. They raised a family in Brockton. And my sister was married living in Whitman, and my brother was married living in Avon, and he had an aunt and uncle in Hanson and relatives all over Plymouth County and some in Norfolk. But my father had had a couple strokes, and in my neighborhood there was some break-ins, and I was trying to get involved with things, and a friend of mine says, why don't you run for office? And prior to that, a former mayor said, why don't you get involved with the Neighborhood Crime Watch? In today's world, people are moving constantly. They're not staying in the same house. Jobs, careers change, and it was a good thing to get to know your neighbors again. And sometimes we just met for a cup of coffee on somebody's back porch, but it got to know the neighbors, and it was very helpful. And so then I ran for school committee and served one term on the school committee. Halfway through that tenure, my predecessor, Tom Plouffe, was appointed to a city solicitor's job. So I won a special election in the middle of winter with the old wooden signs. And I served 13 years on the council. And back then, we ended up getting a lot of state funding. We got 90% reimbursement to build 5 elementary schools. As I mentioned, we got money for our library to put a handicapped addition on that, kept the old historic facade. And our treasurer at the time, Shannon O'Brien, helped get some state lottery money to build a council on aging for our senior center. And it was great. And then I served 13 years and things were going good, but like everything, not every day is a day of sunshine. So then when my predecessor, Tom Kennedy, became a state senator, I ran for the rep seat and I was successful. And then we had another downturn. That was in 2008. And luckily, through some vision of our forefathers, they created what was called a rainy day fund. It's like you or I having a savings account. So when times are tough and the revenue's not there, we're able to use a surplus at the state to keep things above water and keep things flowing. And we survived. And then when I got in the Senate, after Tom, we lost him in 2015, I won an election to fill that seat. We had a lot of money coming in. So we got a lot of money back to communities, but there's never enough. And it's been up and down, as we know, and it's even though there's a lot of, like, unemployment might be down, but inflation is high right now, and there's other things affecting the Commonwealth, the country. And you know, one thing I learned, that nobody does this job alone, and I'm very fortunate of support of many people in this room and people across the towns I represent. As was mentioned, I represent the city of Brockton, I represent the towns of Whitman, Hanson, Halifax, East Bridgewater, and with redistricting I had Avon and the south end of Randolph. I used to have Easton and Hanover, and I've got a lot of friends in the towns I don't represent, so people still call me. And I've gotten calls, everything from the cat stuck on the tree to some more serious issues. And again, I didn't do this job alone. I've got some great people. I've got a great staff that helps me out. I have people that I work with, like Rep. Sullivan, and I work with other legislators. And unlike what we hear in the media every day with the division in this country, and it's unfortunate, we have a good team in the Commonwealth. We have Republicans and Democrats that work very well together. I may not even agree on every Democratic issue, but at the end of the day, you got to come to a common consensus or you'll never get anything done. And when we pass legislation, there's never a similar thing that legislation that passes the Senate is exactly the way the House of Representatives pass it, but we send things to what's called the Conference Committee. So today, we had a supplemental budget that we had voted on that come to a common consensus to close out this year's fiscal year about, you know, you still got to pay your bills like everybody else. We cannot deficit spend at the state level. And we also passed a climate energy bill. And as we know, our environment's suffering out there. And you know, I don't believe you can put all your eggs in one basket. Some people are for gasoline and oil, and some people want to do solar, and some people want to do wind. I've also filed legislation about anaerobic digestion, which I've learned a lot. There was a lot of farms in Plymouth County back in the day, predominantly dairy farms or cranberry bogs, and a lot have gone because real estate's gone through the roof and we need housing. And these farmers have been suffering out there. So I've visited farms all over the Commonwealth and learned about anaerobic digestion, and what they do there, they take food waste. And you can't keep burying food waste in the landfills. They're being overcapacitated. And you need other source of energy. So I visited some farms that we gave some tax incentives for. And it's like there's a company out in the western part of the state, Noonan Oil, that started in Brockton. They're in West Bridgewater. Coca-Cola, Polar Beverages out of Worcester, Domino's Pizza. They bring their food waste because no matter what you're producing, you're always going to have waste, and you can't bury it in the landfill. So they bring it into this farm. They have these big containers, and it's like a balloon on top. It's methane gas they produce, and there's no odor because it's covered. So it's like you have to have 100,000 cows to produce what this energy produces, and you know, everyone will be complaining about the manure smell. So they create methane and they sell it back into the market. It's another form of energy because, as I mentioned, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and you're trying to get away from the fossil fuels, but I know we can't do it all at once because you're trying to keep costs down for the consumers. So that's just a little bit of what we're doing. I could go on forever tonight. I'm very grateful. I know a lot of the people in the crowd tonight, but I'm going to leave my business cards here if anybody needs to reach me. And we still have a lot of work to do. There's an economic development bill for job creation and help the business community out. That's sitting on a conference committee, and there's a couple other bills here. But even next year, and like everything, you know, sometimes it takes a couple tries at the bat swing to get legislation passed, and it may not happen tomorrow, but if we keep after it and if enough people support it, no matter what the issue is, we can get things accomplished. And we've done a pretty good job, I consider, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Again, nothing's perfect. We're not all going to solve the world in one day. In what Carl was mentioning about the Greeks, they were the first country to start democracy, and I love studying history. And even as bad as things are today, we knew about the stories with Adam and Jefferson. They were both betting on who would go first when they both passed away on July 4th. they were hating each other back in those days. Now, it's a little different with today, what's going on, but we have to learn from our past mistakes, and if we don't, we're doomed to repeat them in the future, and we have to work together, because, you know, Tom Brady, I'm not related to him, but he didn't win all those Super Bowls with just him at the quarterback. He had a great team, and he had some decent coaches and so forth, so he didn't win alone either. We're fortunate in the Commonwealth who we have and who we work with, but at the national level, I think we've got to get a better job. You know, I know our local officials like Congressman Lynch and some of the other officials, but we've got to find to bring this country together and these local communities together, because as we know, you know, brothers and cousins are arguing with each other over politics, and the social media has gotten out of control, and there's limited control. I believe in freedom of the press, I believe in freedom of expression and all that, but it's unfortunate things have gotten so tough out there, and we have to learn to work together. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for the group putting this together and moving forward. I'm always here at WHRHS, so anything I can do to help out, please let me know, because besides me talking, which you can talk your ear off on, we got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so the most important thing is to listen. So I'm going to sit down and listen to the rest of the crowd. I want to hear from the people here in the audience what you'd like to see from our government. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brady. Our next speaker is a local fellow who I met his dad when I was a young man, played basketball and went golfing and everything else. And he's one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life. And guess what? So is his son. And that son is Dr. Toomey, Dr. Joshua Toomey. And Dr. Toomey is a resident of Whitman. He serves on the board of directors for the Whitman Freedom Team. He received his BA in psychology from Stonehill College, his master's in counseling and psychology from Assumption College, and his PhD educational psychology from UConn. He's currently an assistant professor of family medicine at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He also runs a private practice, and my pleasure to introduce Josh Toomey.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Tom. My name is, as Tom said, I'm Josh Toomey. Thank you for having me here tonight to say a few words regarding the promotion of unity in our town. I fundamentally believe that an essential element to the pursuit of unity is the practice of listening. So I'm a therapist, as Tom mentioned, in Whitman, and I have the great privilege of participating in counseling sessions with individuals from all over the South Shore, individuals with a multitude of backgrounds, whether social, economic, racial, religious, political. I get to sit down with them and I get to hear their stories. And their stories are subject to bias, as all of our stories are subject to bias. They're influenced by our fears and our disappointments and our needs, sometimes by our trauma and also our wants and our hopes. And this bias is not inherently good. It is not inherently bad. It just is. It's human. There is a stereotype of therapists, which is not off base, that therapists do a lot of nodding, that we are constantly nodding and saying very, very little. And when we do talk, it comes in the form of, how does that make you feel? 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 But when that happens, it's not out of laziness. At least it shouldn't be. It's out of listening. We do this because we're listening, and listening is where change takes place. It's where healing can take place, and it creates an environment where movement can take place. Listening is the opposite of lecturing. In therapy, we don't lecture. We don't tell people how they should feel about this or how they should think about that. We don't say, be less anxious of this and be less depressed about that, or be more accepting of this or less accepting of that. We don't do this because it's not effective. It doesn't work. In fact, doing so would very much create the opposite effect, where people would cling to their original stories instead of examining them. But genuine listening establishes safety. It allows for people to examine the biases of their own stories. It allows them to be open to a multitude of other perspectives and other ideas. Listening is not about agreeing with what the other person is saying. That's not required. You do not have to agree with the client. You don't have to like what the client is saying. Not one bit. The only thing that is required is to see them as a person who is trying to communicate who they are, what is hard for them, and who they want to become. Listening establishes trust because they know whatever they are telling me, however painful it may be or important to them, it may be that my goal is to hear them fully. It lessens their concerns of misinterpretation, dismissal, and even betrayal. And this trust allows me to give my thoughts, interpretations, and to share with them my concern and viewpoints in a real and genuine way. One of the most notable and influential psychologists of the 20th century was Carl Rogers. Dr. Rogers wrote a great deal about the effects of listening in human interaction. And in his seminal book, A Way of Being, he writes, I can testify that when someone really hears you without passing judgment on you, without trying to take responsibility for you, without trying to mold you, it feels damn good. At these times, it has relaxed the tension in me. It has permitted me to bring out the frightening feelings, the guilt, the despair, the confusion that have been part of my experience. When I have been listened to and when I have been heard, I am able to perceive my world in a new way and to go on. It is astonishing how elements that seem insoluble become soluble when someone listens, how confusions that seem irremediable turn into relatively clear flowing streams when one is heard. Finally, I believe a key to unity is better communication. And that is why we're all here tonight, is commitment to better communication. And communication based on listening, validation, trust, helps us move toward a healthier place, a healthier Whitman, a place built upon tolerance, acceptance, respect, and dignity of all of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. That reminds me, I did put a couple of pamphlets, sheets of paper that outlined how to be a good listener. And some of the things that Josh pointed out are on that sheet. So if you want to take a peek at it, it was a result of a collaborative meeting that I went with my wife and Sharon Hall. And I think you remember that we're talking about how to have a difficult conversation. It was very, very good. But there's an outline there that might help you. Our next speaker is, Yolani Gonell. And Yolani is from Bridgewater State University. She's the Assistant Vice President for Student Success, Diversity and Inclusion at Bridgewater State University, which is recognized as the #3 safest campus in the United States. That says a lot for the kind of work that people like Yolani does. She's a U.S. veteran. She has spent 20 years, more than 20 years, of progressive experience in higher education, providing guidance and strategies to advance inclusion, racial equality, and student retention. Yolani serves on the advisory board for the Campaign for Southern Equality, which is known as CFSE, which is a group that works to support and strengthen the LGBTQ community in the South. My pleasure to introduce Yolani.
Good evening, everyone. Get excited. We bring a lot of energy into this space. It's a great pleasure to see everyone here and to see such a wonderful turnout. And as introduced, I'm Yolani Ganell, and I serve as the AVP. I'm the inaugural AVP at Bridgewater State University. And when we think about what it means to be the first Latina in a role like this, it means a lot to me and a lot to our students and to our families. So I want to talk to you a little bit about why I was invited. I was asked to share remarks on the importance of fostering safe and inclusive communities and offer insights on how Bridgewater State University became ranked number 3 out of thousands of schools in the country and also designated as a LGBT-friendly college. But before I start, I want to just scan the room real quick. By round of applause, are there any current or former athletes in this space? Right? Former or current athletes. And perhaps if you're not an athlete, have you ever been a parent to a student athlete? Right? Are there any active service members or veterans in the room tonight? Okay. We got a couple veterans. Thank you for your service. I think back to my time in junior high, joining the intramural co-ed softball team. And I grew up in New York City, so I want you to think about a vastly different community than we are in here today at Whitman. And I'm currently a recent Whitman resident. I moved here just about a month ago. So it's very exciting to be here. Thank you. Okay. And so you think about growing up in New York City and the level of funding that we might have had in a public school system in an urban community. And I can tell you that that was one of the greatest times in my experience. It was the first time that I joined a team. I did try playing volleyball, but I don't know about y'all, but when you do like this and you hit the ball, once it hurt, I said, that's not for me, right? It just wasn't for me, so I didn't move beyond that. And I think about the time when I was in basic training. And so for all of our veterans or folks who have been somehow connected to our service, when we think about basic training, lots of colorful memories come in. But you know, here's the thing. One of the common thread about both of these experiences is the importance of building a strong team. Messages from my coach and from the drill sergeant on sticking together, on not leaving anyone behind, and most importantly, being a unified front. Unity requires us to work across difference, to find common ground, and more importantly, to hold space for accountability. Accountability for our words and accountability for our actions. As we think about the work that you are doing as a family, the work that you've done as a family, because now many of us maybe don't have the children in the home. But one of the things that we have been doing, regardless if our kids are at home or not and they've lived their own lives, we are good neighbors to one another. And as good neighbors, we continue to instill values around unity and the importance of community building. And I think that that is truly because, it is truly because of family like yours and our families who may be later watching this program, that Bridgewater State University was recently ranked top 3 LGBT-friendly institution by Best College. And BSU is also ranked by the Wall Street Journal as a 2025 Best College in America. Our students are coming to college with a strong sense of desire to form friend groups, but more importantly, to feel a sense of belonging on campus. And as we learned in the field, there are times in which players from opposing teams clash. There are times when we operate out of fear of the unknown, similar to what Josh recently alluded to. And in these moments, we may say things or do things that don't align with our values of unity. And I think this holds true on every campus, including ours. But what makes me really proud about working at BSU is our commitment to advance equity-minded practices in our policies and within our work, regardless of the roles that we have. Everyone, no matter what their role is, no matter what division they're in, is responsible for closing equity gaps in the retention of our students. So what this looks like for us as an institution is that, one, we ask the question, do students and employees feel a sense of belonging here? And if they don't, what do we do as a community to break down barriers? We create space for dialogues, similar like what we're doing tonight. We create space for celebration, similar to how members of our community come together for major fundraisers, as we heard from our senator, and other thematic programs that are occurring around town. We also create shared learning communities to learn about the students we serve and their experience. This includes sensitivity training on language, attitudes, and behaviors that cause harm. We include training on how to have difficult conversations and restorative practices. And we also include wellness and mindfulness activities for personal care, recognizing that as people, we all struggle with something and that we cannot always separate our work and that of that work that we're doing and our own personal lives. And oftentimes we hear that, oh, we have to come to, put everything in little boxes and leave everything at the door, but that's not true, right? I think that our communities have evolved to understand that we are wanting to bring our full selves into these spaces. So I encourage us to think about how we can all create a sense of belonging to people who appear to be different from us in our roles as community members, and what this looks like, or maybe what it could look like, right? And these are just some questions for you to think about, right? One of the things around equity-minded practices is that we start with equity-minded inquiry. So perhaps we begin by asking, do new families feel a sense of belonging here? And if they don't, what can we do as a community to break down barriers? Can we diversify our community events and offer cultural celebrations that reflect newcomers' traditions and their music? We can incorporate signage in multiple languages. Could we do that? Could we update single-stall bathrooms into any gender bathrooms, whether that's in the mall or places that are in public? So single stall, doesn't matter who uses it. What might that mean to members of our community? The fifth question that we can think about in terms of being an equity-minded leader and someone who is really thinking about how might we form stronger communities in our communities at home is, can we increase visibility of allyship? Provide perhaps an ally flag or signs that says everyone is welcome. And allyship doesn't just extend to the LGBT community, extends to people who are neurodivergent, extends to people who are from different faith traditions, and extends to people with just a different lived experience than your own. So how might you show up as an ally to someone who is different? Perhaps a bigger question for us to think about is, if you were to serve as a supervisor, or maybe you are in a position of influence at your own job, might you want to explore offering cultural awareness training for employees so that they can learn more about the newcomers who will be accessing services or goods? Might you explore allied training and get insight on inclusive practices that applies to all people, regardless of race or identity? And as we think about our faith communities, what that might look like as well. I offer these as considerations to all who are seeking guidance on new ways to strengthen our community in Whitman and our surrounding areas. And let's not shy away from a different bottom line that was highlighted slightly earlier, but I want to emphasize tonight in terms of what type of impact inclusion makes. And that is that the more welcoming we are, the more economic progress we will make. So with that, I leave you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. That reminds me of a story. About 2 weeks after October 7th of last year, I was at Bridgewater State University, and I approached President Fred Clark, and I said, "Can I speak to you for a moment?" And if you know Fred Clark, he's the all-American guy. He's smart, he's bright, he's friendly, he's genuine, he's got everything going for him. He's never always right. And I said to him, "You know, there's riots going on at different universities all over the United States, everywhere. How come nothing here?" He said, "Tom, the moment a new group comes in, I am there the first day. I'm there at their meetings. I'm there to help them. I'm there to foster good communications. We are all together, and not just me, it's everybody." And he says, "So when things like this happen, I don't have those problems because we already know how to discuss it." And you know what? I think we could be a Bridgewater State University here in Whitman. I really do. So thank you. That's a very important point. Our next speaker is filled in for somebody who couldn't make it. He's a dear friend of mine, Dr. Michael Krasanik. And like Carl, I could go on for so many things about what he's done. But he's a professor emeritus of political science and currently serves as special assistant to the president of Bridgewater State University. He served as the head of the political science department, was the editor of the award-winning publication Review, which highlighted Bridgewater students, staff, and alumni. He has authored more than a dozen books and is currently co-authoring a second book with his daughter, Dr. Annie Carath. Your daughter, correct? He currently serves on the board of directors for the Whitman Freedom Team and Fathers Bills and Mainstream, which provides support and housing for the homeless. Mike has dedicated his life to serving others. It's my privilege to introduce Michael Krasanik.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for coming here tonight. I wanted to start out by saying that as a member of the Whitman Freedom Team, we're involved, and hopefully you'll all become involved in developing a community here in Whitman that is caring, that emphasizes civility, sharing, and goodwill. All people in Whitman should be part of what we can often call in political science the common good. No one is left out. That unity brings stability and strength and opportunity. And so as we move forward today, and what my remarks are, is how can we best achieve caring, civility, sharing, goodwill, the common good? As a political scientist, I'm going to go through some of the important documents very, very quickly, and some of the important phrases from those documents that I think help us to understand what we can do here in Whitman to create a better community, a community of caring, civility, sharing, and goodwill. The first one comes from the Latin. The Great Seal of the United States is called E Pluribus Unum. You've probably heard of that, the Great Seal. From many, one. We are a nation of diversity, and we are a nation of geographic regions, 50 states, socioeconomic differences and characteristics, racial and ethnic identities, multiple religions, and gender differences. Diversity has been part of what we are as a nation and part of what we in Whitman are encountering today, a town that has many different people from many different backgrounds. Unfortunately, though, diversity does not come easy in our society and others. There has been discrimination, there is jealousy, there is hatred, there is anger, there is refusal to accept others as they are. But oneness is, out of this diversity, can bring a common good. And this diversity is a goal that is worth pursuing. Diversity will only strengthen what we are here in Whitman. The second phrase, or from documents from the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. The words of Thomas Jefferson that were enhanced by Benjamin Franklin became the inalienable rights of all Americans to be equal and to be recognized as equal. In fact, equality is kind of the defining value of what it means to be an American. But diversity, and equality, like diversity, has not been easy to obtain. We have a history of discrimination against those who are viewed as different. We have a history of antagonism against those who question the status quo. And we have a history of actions taken to limit the freedom of those who are unliked. But equality is central to forming a just society and a just Whitman. Equality is critical to accepting all people, all residents of Whitman, as having equal worth. Equality can be seen as kind of a social glue that can bind us together as a one people. Then there is the preamble to the Constitution, which starts out with the famous words, "We the people," three very important words. Government that values the people, all people, not just some people, not just rich people, not just white people, not just people with long residencies here, but all people. That means that we as a people have the responsibility to work for the common good, for not just for some people and the common good. Of course, that means we have a responsibility as residents of Whitman to become involved in making our town a place where the common good thrives, where we all work together to improve the lives of all our residents. We the people. Finally, we are a land of opportunity, the American dream. Many of us here were part of the great immigrant experience, the immigration that continues today. And in fact, as we have many, many visitors and many, many new residents coming from other parts of the world. The American dream means that everyone in our town has the opportunity to succeed, to fulfill their dreams. It is an obligation of those who came before to help those who are new arrivals and give them an opportunity to succeed. The American dream works when people work together to help others get a start. Whitman Unity Day that we're having here today and will continue on in the coming days, weeks, and years is the beginning of a movement, I'd say, to make the values of our founders come to life. The values of oneness, the value of equality, the value of common good, and the value of opportunity. So I ask you tonight and to join Tom and other members of the Whitman Freedom Team to join together to make unity a reality. Thank you.
I did. Michael said I took a seat. There's another Michael here who remembers when I took somebody else's seat at a town meeting. Do you remember that, Michael? Michael was the town moderator, and I sat down beside a lady that I thought was my wife. It wasn't. He reminded me of it. Oh, he forgot something. Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. See, now you got me all messed up.
That was my first.
Is Father, yes, he is. Father Adrian's here. Let me just go on further. I have to find your introduction. You messed me up. Oh, here we go. Father Adrian is Malik or Malek? Millick. Father Millick is here tonight. He's going to say a few words, and at the end he will bless us, and that'll be the end of our program. Before we go, I want to thank everybody here for attending. I want to thank the people of the Whitman Freedom Team who have helped organize this. I want to thank the cable company, WHCA, and Rob in particular for allowing us to come here. And thank you to all of us. The last thing I want to say is this. We can be different, but we can work together. Remember that. We can be different, but we can work together. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Father Adrian Millick. Oh, I didn't tell you where you're from. Come on up. Father is from the Holy Ghost Parish in Whitman and the St. Bridget's Parish in Abington.
Good evening. I've been here in Whitman for a little over 3 years, Whitman and Abington. But the beginning of my life, I grew up in Poland. And growing up there, I remember a lot of family stories about the time when my grandparents were growing up. My great-grandparents were living through first the occupation by Nazi Germany and then through the difficult years under communism, which I only personally knew the end of. And both those totalitarian regimes, while very different, were very similar in a number of things, and one of them was their constant attempts to divide people against each other. They worked to destroy anything that could serve as a source of unity. And they worked to destroy any sense of truth. And I think the reason we are gathered here is because we realize that truth and unity is what allows us to achieve greatness, allows us to achieve our purpose, and allows us to strengthen one another. Because when we are working together despite our differences, when we are working together despite the fact that each one of us is seeing things from a slightly different angle, then our views can become richer. When we are working together because we are striving to hear one another, then we're able to discover a greater richness, but also we're able to really see each other. And that sense of being known provides a sense of safety and a sense of dignity that allows us to share what is truly good in us. And so as we come together today to reflect on unity, I hope that it's something that we will continue to live out each day, that we will be trying to continue to learn about one another, to support one another, to share what we know to be true, and to listen so that we can learn from others the truths that they have discovered. That is one of the things that has made this town great, this state great, this country great. It's the fact that we're not all the same, but we're all working together to find what unites us and find the truths that can bring us moving forward. And so I am happy to be able to join you here today, to join in this mission, because there is nothing greater than what we can do together and become together as long as we are doing it with a genuine desire to listen, to share, and to pursue what is true and good. And given my own faith tradition, I would like to end by asking the Lord to be with us, to bless us and to guide us as we continue to pursue this desire for what is true and what is good. In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, pour out your blessing upon all of us gathered here and upon everyone who is important in our lives. Strengthen our community, unite us in mutual respect and love, and help us to recognize the gifts that you have placed in the heart of each and every person. Guide us closer to the truth. Guide us closer to one another. And help us to approach each person we meet with respect, with care. And help us to become a stronger and better community by the way that you unite us and guide us ever forward. In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all very much.
That concludes our program. We have a question, Mr. Scriven. Certainly. You certainly may. This is Chris Scriven, who is formerly on the school committee, who's also on the Whitman Freedom Team, and one of my favorite guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. Yeah, I kind of, it's like bursted out of my chest right now wanting to talk to you all. Because I recognize what we're dealing with, right? What the situation is. And it breaks my heart that our community is going through this. It breaks my heart that our country is going through this. And I'm up here because I want to make the point how important it is for all of us to engage. I don't have degrees. I don't have a long history of public service like some of you. I'm not an expert in political science, but I have a voice that's no more and no less important than anybody else, right? And I think that's something that we should all remember and we should all exercise. And I'm encouraging everybody else watching at home to please engage, right? As I look around this room, so many of you have been here for us for so long. And it means a great deal to me. You guys have all been the leaders that we've looked to help us get through tough times. And you're still showing up decades later. And it's very, very meaningful and significant for you all to dedicate yourselves to our community the way you have. And it's very much appreciated. I have lived in Whitman all my life. I come from a big family. My wife comes from a big family. Growing up, I did all I could to stay out of the house, to be honest. So I was always out in the streets riding my bike. I had a paper route for 40 papers when I was 8 years old. I started peeling potatoes at Condon's when I was 12 for $2 an hour. I'd fill buckets, right? Worked there through high school, ended up tending bar there before I was married. And in the meantime, I started coaching right out of high school. And after I was married, I wanted to continue to serve my community, so I continued coaching. But then when I felt that, a calling, I wanted to serve, and I was elected to the school committee twice. And I firmly believe that I was elected twice because I'm very straightforward. And I'm an independent and have been for 30 years. I don't hold any allegiance to any party. I hold allegiance to my community and my family. So that's what brings me out. I can't speak as eloquently as these folks. you know, it's an honor to have all your perspectives shared with us. It means so much. So I'm the guy that's up there tripping over my tongue. I'm not a public speaker, but I want people at home to know that I'm going to get up in the morning, everything's going to be okay. Like this isn't that big of a deal. All right? So I'm encouraging everyone to use their voice, to engage in these issues. Because I started to say I'm a big family. You got to learn how to figure stuff out from a big family, right? If you want to have a big, healthy family, you got to be able to have those difficult conversations. And you got to be able to do it honestly and straight. And a lot of times it means you're not going to agree with your family members, right? But you love them and you believe in what it means to be part of something so special. And that's just like that for me and my community. I don't agree with everybody in my community, but I care greatly about everyone in my community. My community looks different than it did 20 years ago. And to me, that's the point, that we're growing, we're changing, right? We have different challenges that we face. But if we do it together, right, that's how we grow. That's how we build those bonds. So that's what I'm trying to communicate, that a guy like me that, you know, my wife calls me a street rat, right? I was a street rat growing up. I don't have any, like I said, no degrees, nothing. I just found a way to invest in my community and serve it from the time I was a young kid. And like they say, as much as you give, you get more in return, right? And that, I can say that absolutely is true. So I'm up here encouraging everyone to engage in these conversations, trust in those relationships that you've built over the years. Don't be afraid. I have one bone to pick with my community growing up. We were encouraged not to talk about what? Religion and politics, right? Why? Why? Why can't we trust in those bonds to be able to have these conversations and to come? We don't need to all agree, but we need to respect, right? And that dignity that you were speaking of. We all have that dignity. So I encourage us all to engage in these conversations and trust one another. I'll be hopefully broadcasting soon on WHCA. I'm going to try to bring in some community leaders over the next week because I think it's so important for our community to hear from all of its leaders on these issues, right? We need to come together and we need our leaders to speak out and show us the way like you always have. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. Hope you learned something. One group I'd like to thank that I forgot to thank the Whitman Hanson Regional School District for allowing us to use this facility, and also for the people helping us set up the podium, the microphones, and a few other things. So thank you very much. Have a nice night. Peace.